Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to talk a little bit about our experience on particularly the 2016 HIV high-level meeting, but also about the high-level meetings on HIV in general. The high-level meeting on HIV was June 2016, and yesterday when I was finalizing the presentation, I realized that it's 2 years ago. And for those of you that were involved in that, it seems like yesterday on the one hand, and it seems like a decade on the other. There were 6 months of very intense work, from selecting the Stakeholder task force, which I will talk a little bit more in a moment, the development of the civil society hearing, the negotiation of the political declaration, and then, of course, the organization of the actual high-level meeting that resulted in a political declaration. So the Office of the President of the General Assembly called to establish a stakeholder task force. In the past, it was called the Civil Society Task Force. For 2016, that was changed in line with the language in the Sustainable Development Goals. We had 12 members. It included people from the private sector, unions, foundation, etc. But what was interesting in this specific example is that there were 7 people openly living with HIV, and so more than half, and that was something that we were very keen in demonstrating and implementing JIPA. We had representatives of 4 key populations, people who use drugs, sex workers, men who have sex with men, and for the first time we have a transgender spot specifically. We had seats for an a representative indigenous population. That was also a first, women and youth, and as I said, there were others. I asked the Stakeholder Task Force, some of the global network of key population and organizations that supported the high-level meeting to provide some input into this presentation, because the learnings were all of us. So I tried to reflect some of the things that they reflected on. So for ICASO, and this is where I'm here, we were asked to provide a secretarial function to the Stakeholder Task Force. So some of these learnings and some of the reflections are based on that aspect, but also, the broader aspect of the high-level meeting. There was a feeling that a lot of the decisions were being made in New York by northern organizations, and some of the things that we were asked to check on, it was looking at make sure that the regional perspectives and the national perspectives are included in everything you are doing, and that there was some balance. But at the same time, recognizing that, of course, there was a power imbalance because we were dealing with New York, and how do you address that? The second thing that was reflected on was looking at who are your best partners, particularly at national level, and how do you ensure that they have the capacity to be involved in global policy processes. And this was key because not all national organizations have the capacity or the interest to be involved. So you need to be very careful that you are not overburdening them with requests for information or answering a survey or providing input. One key thing that came back over and over was that we needed to have a better coordination to reduce the amount of information. And I imagine that this is the same case. There are several frameworks or several things, and you are asked to provide input over and over. So that was part also, maybe some of the frustration from people that were receiving requests. And our partners identify 2 keys to success. One was about the relationship with the co-facilitators of the high-level meeting, being transparent and trusted. And that was key, particularly for the task force, to be able to go back to the facilitator and say, like, those words in the draft are not going to fly with us, or, we are hearing this, you should address it, etc. And identifying allies early in the process. And your allies are, be the missions in New York, certain countries, your national governments and the central government, NGOs that are in New York that understand this process because they do all these processes all the time. So for me, I wanted to show how we thought about the high-level meeting process. So the before of the high-level meeting was, the civil society hearing and how that influenced or not the political declaration. And then the during is the negotiation and the approval and the actual high-level meeting. And then, of course, as they were saying, like the after, which is the implementation of the political declaration and then the accountability and the reporting of the commitments. So some of the lessons, again, based on the before stage, we had months of coming to a consensus among diverse stakeholders. And there were people from TV, there were people with very specific mandates from their organization, and trying to get clear priorities of what is that we, as civil society, whatever that means, want out of the political declaration. And we came out with 10 key asks. And we had probably 300 organizations from all around the world signing on that. And that was a roadmap. We wanted to check if those were our priorities, how do we help negotiate those priorities? So we try to be inclusive of all issues, population, and region. The drafts went out in 4 languages, for example, so to make sure that people that are not English speakers were comfortable providing input and providing comments. And the other thing that we did is that we provide a specific language that we wanted to see in the declaration. For example, we look at the previous declaration and say, okay, this is how we want key populations to be referred to with the specific words. We included language that was a non-negotiable, not only what we wanted to see, but we also included things that we didn't want to see, like, like if the declaration was going to be looking at prevention only based on abstinence, for example. That was unacceptable. And then, if possible, depending on the 10 asks, adding targets and indicators to help with the accountability. We did a lot of visits to UN missions to share the priorities. We tried to go with advocates from those countries or the regions, and that was greatly appreciated by the missions. Engage and support country advocates to advocate in their countries. And, for the 2016, there was a much better engagement between the Stakeholder Task Force, the Office of the President of the General Assembly, and the co-facilitators. During the high-level meeting, and I said during includes the negotiation process, particularly the 3 weeks before the high-level meeting, we try to ensure a better alignment between capitals and UN mission. And if you are in that moment now, you will see that capitals will say something, and then the UN mission will say something very different, because the UN mission has no idea about what TB is. The same negotiator goes and talks about disarmament and environment, and next day TB. And so these are professional negotiators. So they need to get the content from the capital. There are different stakeholders And those need to be embraced and understand, where they are coming from and what they bring. Understand the limitation of the process, of course, is the UN, so, not very consultative and is not transparent, and we need to understand that. The negotiators in New York, as I said before, have no technical expertise in the majority of the cases. And then try to understand that the outcome document is a negotiated document. Very few times it will go to a vote, and therefore, it's going to be quite basic, and they are going to try the minimum common denominator, so there is no issues at the end. One of the things that we did, and I'll show in the next slide, is that we tried to look at what were the position of the country vis-a-vis certain issues. And then we try to look, and that will help with the accountability part, we try to look at if that position changed as either we advocated or as the negotiation went by. One of the things is you will have an ally on an issue that will be your enemy in another issue. So how do you deal with, X country that, wants to put people living with HIV in prison, while at the same time is the country that is more outspoken about TRIPS. So how do you negotiate that? One key strategy in looking at the high-level meeting is the participation of civil society representatives in the official government delegation. That's key. They get all the information before anybody else. They are able to hear, the last-minute negotiation, etc. But again, they need to have support. Those individuals need to have, a support of understanding the issues and what you need. And then after the high-level meeting is over and you have your political declaration, how do you measure your joint advocacy success? You look at your red lines or your key asks versus the political declaration. One of the things that was highlighted by a few people is that for the first time, a political declaration on HIV talks about indigenous people specifically, and that was mentioned as a key success of advocacy. And then, the creation of an alternative complementary monitoring accountability tool or mechanism, which is something that we have supported with shadow reporting, and then supporting the meaningful involvement in any official mechanism, if any.